Hi everyone! We've already spoken about how studying takes up a lot of attention and that we should take breaks to avoid burning out. One common way people try to do this is by checking our phones. Social media and instant messaging are great because they keep us connected and entertained. But just like eating chocolate cake, moderation is key. Today we'll explain why it's important to minimize screen time by looking at the effects of phones on attention. We'll also suggest some tips to help minimize screen time and boost productivity for the next time we study. Let's begin. We probably already know that phones distract us, but what actually happens to our attention? In the previous video, we spoke about how we have limited attentional resources that we use when we're studying. If we put screen time into the mix, that's an extra thing taking up our attention, so it gets spread super thin and it becomes even harder to stay focused. Psychological studies have shown that our phones can distract us in 3 ways: when we engage in instant messaging, when we receive notifications, and even just having our phones there with us in our study space. So we'll be breaking down how each of these impacts our attention. First, instant messaging. When we message or text someone while doing another task, we're essentially task switching. This is basically alternating our attention between 2 tasks, such as texting and reading. When our attention is constantly shifting, it takes us a longer time to finish a task and tick things off of our to-do list, since it takes some time and effort to swap in and out of tasks. Avoiding the shift in attention is the key. So if we need to finish reading a passage from a Shakespeare play, it's probably best to keep texting to a minimum and devote our attention to what we need to read. Okay, say we've decided not to text at all. It turns out we can still get distracted when we hear the ring or buzz of a notification. Even notifications that are short in duration can have a significant cost to our attention. Studies have shown that notifications are the most disruptive when we're doing a really complex task, or if we're in the middle of finishing a task. Although we're not actively engaging with our phones, notifications can lead to our mind wandering and trigger thoughts that are irrelevant to the task. For example, just from hearing our phone ding, we might start thinking about plans for the weekend rather than our work. So even deciding not to read the message and reply may not be enough to prevent distractions. And lastly, even when no one is messaging us, having our phones in our study space can reduce our attentional resources. This is called the brain drain hypothesis, that the mere presence of a phone can occupy our attention, making it harder for us to focus on studying. Researchers have tested whether the location of the phone on the desk, in another room, or in a bag has an effect on test performance. It turns out that test results were highest for people whose phones were in another room, followed by the bag, and then lowest for phones on the desk. So the more present your phone is, the harder it is to perform well in cognitive tasks. Now we've learnt that our phones can really affect our productivity, even when we don't actively engage in texting or calling. So, here are some tips that can help minimize screen time so we can give our full attention to our studies. Putting the phone in another room. Out of sight, out of mind. If our phones aren't there with us while we're studying for an exam, we're less likely to get distracted by a notification. Flight mode. If it's impossible to put the phone in another room because we're studying at a cafe or library, then the next best thing is to put it on flight mode and pop it in our bag. Using screen time as a reward. When we're ready to take a break, we can dedicate 5 to 10 minutes to reply to a message or check Instagram. If the phone is in another room, even better. This gives us a good opportunity to stretch our legs and move. Screen time monitoring apps. There are lots of apps that can monitor how many hours we spend browsing through social media. That way, we can feel more accountable and motivated to reduce unnecessary phone use. Temporarily deleting apps. If worst comes to worst, then it may be good to consider deleting distracting apps like Facebook or Instagram temporarily, especially if deadlines are fast approaching. So, with that advice done, let's wrap up. Today, we learnt that phones can impair our attention when studying. We also covered several strategies to minimize screen time. Feel free to pause this video and answer these questions to recall what we talked about. When we're texting and reading, we're switching between 2 things, so it takes us longer to finish reading that textbook. Hearing the ding of a notification can also distract us by causing our minds to wander. We've learned that putting our phones in another room can reduce distractions and help us study more effectively for that upcoming test. But if we're in a public place like a library, then the best thing we can do is pop it in our bag and use screen time as a reward when we're on a study break. That's it for this one. See you in the next video.